Hi, welcome to the second episode of Tea with Tara, Conversations about Writing. My name is Tara Lynn Marta, and today I will be joined by poet Dawn Leas. She's a wonderful poet and a friend. I met Dawn back in 2017, I believe, and I was doing a writer's showcase where I was reading a short story that had just been published of mine, and she was the co-host of the writer's showcase. And then Dawn and I went on to do an anthology together, I Am Strength. And she wrote some wonderful poems for the anthology, and I ended up writing an essay. So we got to do a little mini book tour together. And since then, we've become friends, and she is just a wonderful person. And let me give you a little bio on Dawn. Dawn Leas is a poet, a writing coach, a manuscript consultant, and an arts educator. She is the author of 2 chapbooks, A Person Worth Knowing, and I Know When to Keep Quiet. She also has a full-length poetry collection, Take Something When You Go. Her work has appeared in New York Quarterly, the Patterson Literary Review, Literary Mama, the Pedestal magazine. And besides her love of writing, Dawn is a back-of-the-pack runner, a newbie hiker, saltwater lover, and a mother of 2 grown sons. So in just a few minutes, we'll be joined by Dawn, and we're going to learn about her journey as a writer. As always, Tea with Tara, grab your cup of tea or coffee, whatever you prefer. I prefer mine in my Shakespeare mug. To thine own self be true. Good quote for all of us. So stick with me, and in just a few seconds, we'll be joined by Dawn. Hi, and welcome back. We're joined by Dawn Leas. Welcome, Dawn.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Tara.
Thank you for coming. So I always start the first question right off the bat. I'd love to know, what is your earliest memory of wanting to be a writer, or particularly a poet? When did that start for you?
Sure. So for being a writer, it was definitely, I was 10. I think I was in 4th or 5th grade, and we lived in Texas. And I remember writing these little, like probably what would be called flash fiction pieces, where I personified things in them and kind of imagined the lives of like typewriters and skyscrapers and things like that. And just realizing from that and my love of reading that I love how stories and books can take people either into the book or away into like another land. And I just knew that I wanted to do that. I think in particular with poetry, it took me a little while longer. I had a wonderful creative writing teacher my senior year in high school that really kind of scared me with poetry, really adhered to rules and, meter and rhyme. And I just was like, I can't get this. So I kind of paused my poetry writing through college and then came back to it in my mid-20s.
Wonderful. How did your family feel, your family and friends? Because so often when people hear this is what you want to do, you want to be a writer, they kind of don't understand it. How are the people in your life?
So when I was growing up, my parents were supportive. Like when I said I wanted to be a writer, what I always would say is I want to be a mom, a teacher, and a writer. So my parents were supportive, but my dad was also, and probably still is, very practical, right? So he's like, well, you need to go to school and you need to find a major that's going to make a living, that you can make a living at. So he kind of steered me toward a major. I was a communications major, with mainly journalism classes. So he kind of steered me toward what he thought at the time would be like the best profession for me. And I did work in advertising and marketing for a while, and actually like throughout my life, since my 20s. So they were supportive. They still are. They continue to be supportive. I think my family is a little afraid when I'm in the room because they often know that something might end up in a poem or a story.
Right.
Yeah.
It is important. You do need something to fall back on. Can't
Yes.
be like, I think Edgar Allan Poe, wasn't it, who tried to make a living just as a writer?
Yes.
It didn't work for him. It doesn't work for the rest of us. So what writers did you look up to, and what writers do you still look up to?
Sure. And it's so funny that you asked this question because I've been thinking and writing about this in terms of like my middle school, like because I was in middle school when I really thought I love to read. I always remember loving to read. And one of my favorites was Judy Blume, right? Like I just kind of wanted to be in those worlds because they were so similar to mine. Like I always felt like out of place and not fitting in. And I think a lot of her characters struggled with that. I think she was really good at kind of capturing that that preteen angst and teen angst in her young adult books. So I think growing up, I just always gravitated, toward Judy Blume. And then when I was in high school, I read all of the classics basically because they were required reading. But, I fell in love with them. I fell in love with A Separate Peace and A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And those were probably two of my favorites in high school. Now, as a poet, I really gravitate towards contemporary poetry. Some of my favorites are Patricia Smith, Sharon Olds, Kim Adenizio, Cheryl St. Germain, and my mentors. I went to graduate school, and I love the poets that we had in the program. I love all of their poetry too.
We have that in common about classic literature. I too also started loving classic literature in high school, my sophomore year. I had a wonderful English teacher. They're always the ones who kind of inspire us.
Absolutely.
So what are you currently working on?
So I'm currently working on a poetry manuscript. I had a chapbook released last year, and in that chapbook, those poems probably spanned about 8 years. Kind of when I pulled them together and saw a cohesive theme to them, it was probably written over about the last 8 years or so. And this one, a theme is developing. Some of the poems are ones that I think I fought off a little bit over the last 5 years, but they are just the ones that are coming to the surface. So I'm just writing my way through them. And I'm pretty close to having what I think is a complete full-length manuscript. I want to get a couple more poems done and then just kind of look at them all together and see, do they really fit together? Are there gaps in the narrative arc that I'm trying to put into the collection as a whole that I might need to fill in. And I also have a novel that I've kind of put down, picked up, put down, picked up again. And I've kind of made 2022 the year of like just getting the first draft of that on the page, no matter what it looks like, no matter how messy it is.
What do you find the most difficult about writing? Do you find it harder to write a novel? Do you think writing poetry? Because I'm not a poet, so I really don't know that aspect of writing.
Yeah. I think, the novel's like a marathon or an ultra marathon, right? So, and I do look at poetry as kind of like maybe like a 10K, but I hear writers, like accomplished writers all the time say, well, I can't write poetry, yet there's lyricism and there's poetry in their prose, right? So I think we all have a little bit of different kind of writers in us. It's just how we cultivate them and how we bring them, to the surface. So for me, I think, especially I have 2 adult sons, and when they were growing up, I found poetry to be easier to write because I could do it in short bursts. Like it came to me in short bursts, or, something would come to me and I would like write it down on a scrap of paper, just wherever I was, at a soccer field or in the car. Where I feel with the novel, getting myself to sit still, like really sit and sit still through the moments of, I don't know where this is going because I am writing it organically right now. That's been the biggest struggle for me so far, but I still love it. And I love the story. And so it keeps bringing me back to it.
And how do you handle, this is a question I often get whenever I do speaking events, different students or wannabe writers always ask, how do you handle rejection? How do you handle it? Because I've known people who just completely throw in the pen, throw in the towel, they give up. How do you handle it?
I try to handle it with a little dose of humor, right? It's just like it is what it is. And I think the older I get, the farther I get in my writing journey, it's easier to see like that there's a level of subjectivity. Sure, people are looking at craft and what the piece is saying and what it could say to people, but there's also whatever that reader is bringing to the table in their own experience as a writer or an editor. And so I try to just always remember that. And, not everyone is going to like what I write, just like I don't like everything that everyone out in the world is writing. You have your likes and your dislikes. I currently serve as an editorial advisor for an online literary journal called River and South. The graduate students in the Wilkes Creative Writing Program curate it. And I think being on the behind the scenes of a journal has really helped me understand that process more. And it's made me more sympathetic to the editors, but it's also, I think, helped me release a lot of that rejection. Now, with that said, I think in December, in a period of a week to 10 days, I got like 3 journal rejections and 2 residency rejections. So when they come all together, it's just like, I just kind of sigh and take another deep breath. And then it was followed by an acceptance. So it's just part of the process. If your goal is to publish your work, you need to get comfortable with rejection, in my opinion.
Right. And you need to have a thick spine, right?
You do. And just, again, you just pick yourself up and move on to the next one.
And do you do anything with the rejections? Like Stephen King used to tape them to his wall in the study or anything like that? Or
I have a file somewhere in my office when we used to get rejections in the mail, way back when, before we use the internet as much as we do now. And so I have some of those older rejections, and I do love reading them. I don't know why, just to kind of go back, but no, I don't. I have a friend who once wallpapered a bathroom with all of her rejections, and I just thought that was a really great idea. But I have not done anything like that.
So what have you written that you're most proud of?
Well, I have 2 chapbooks and a full length, and I'm really proud of those books for different reasons. That my first chapbook, I Know When to Keep Quiet, I wrote as my graduate thesis. So it's a part of my graduate thesis. And it really chronicles a history and a point of time in my life, moving when I was a child. So there's a lot about geography and fitting in and not fitting in. And so that one has like a special place in my heart because it kind of followed my childhood. And then my full length collection is really about being a parent and what happens when your children leave, when they grow up and leave, these things that you pray and hope for them, then they actually, surprise, surprise, finally do it. And then it's like, okay, like what's next in life? So I think because my children are so infused in that book, that's really special to me. And then my last book is a series of poems about people, some I know and some that I don't, but that who inspired me for something in a split second of meeting them or in a long-term friendship. And so it's this collection of people of like, these are really people who are worth knowing. And several years ago, I also wrote an essay for My Body, My Words anthology. And that essay I'm pretty proud of because it was a moment of writing some creative nonfiction that was really scary and uncomfortable for me, yet I did it. And I was proud of myself for sending it in and then for being accepted into the anthology.
And are there any books that have influenced you? And also, when you do read a writer that you really enjoy, you ever have any fear that you're going to imitate their style in any way?
I think I have fear of that just by reading a social media post. I don't know about you, but it's just like, sometimes it's just like, oh my gosh, this is so beautifully written. And now it's like, I don't want it in my brain, right? Because It's just like, I'm afraid like something's going to slip out. So, but I still love to read. So I'm not going to, give that up because of that fear. And I think some of the craft books that I kind of go back to, and it's funny because this just came up in a conversation with somebody today, is Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones and Stephen King's On Writing. I love Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. Like I go back to that. And recently, within the last couple of years, I read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert about the creative and writing process. And I really like that book too.
So if we were to look on your nightstand in your room, what books would we find? Do you currently have anything?
I have a bookshelf as a nightstand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like a 2-shelf bookshelf. And that's interesting because those books there are the ones that I keep on my nightstand are usually ones by people that I know. So there's like a whole shelf of poetry chapbooks by people that I know. And here's the interesting thing. I rarely read in bed. I like when I go to sleep, like I go to sleep. So most of my books are like out here behind me.
Right, I agree. I can't read in bed because then I will go to sleep. As soon as I lie my head down, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
So we have a mutual friend, Marcy, and she is a playwright, also a poet. She has a question for you.
Okay.
She said, I like when inspiration comes from inspiration, from an unexpected place. What one thing was the most surprising influence or inspiration in your writing?
Wow, that's a really good question, Marcy. The most interesting or surprising? I think for me, now that I'm thinking about that, the most surprising are probably the places I lived in as a child, because when I was 8, we went on this great adventure of moving to 4 states in 4 years. And in the moments, I dreaded that. I was not a kid who liked change. I was just like, no, I don't want to do this. So it was a harder time for me. But when I started to look back and just like form my graduate thesis and decide what I might want to write about, these places that we visited that we never, these experiences that I never would have had my parents not said, hey, we're going to try these jobs and move, to these places, I wouldn't have had those experiences or inspirations. And those places still come up in my writing, even after like writing through them in my thesis and in my first book. So I think that's surprising to me that there were these places that as a child, not that I hated them, but I didn't feel welcomed in them, or I didn't feel like grounded in them. I keep returning to them. So that's surprising to me. And in terms of inspiration, like I am a people person. Like I love studying people. So that and nature are two main places that I go to for inspiration.
That's a good segue into this next question, because when I was in college, I had an English professor who said, especially when you're writing fiction, once the writer does the characters, gets the book out there, gets published, the writer is dead. They are not to be confused with the characters. How do you feel about that when people look at maybe characters in a book and say, oh, this is like an autobiography of the writer?
Yeah, I don't mind that. And I think I'm always wondering that, right? Like I'm always wondering when I read a novel, like how much real world made it into this fictional world, right? Because I do believe that as writers, even if we fictionalize things, we pull from, our common experiences. So to me, I don't mind. Like, to me, I'm always interested, like, it's like, oh, if I go to a reading, can I ask that person, like, well, who's this character based on, or who's that based on? So I welcome that. Like, I really try to stay open to all approaches to writing, to storytelling, because I know that we go through fads and trends and really popular things, but you just never know what's going to come up next. So why say, oh, it can only be done this way? Because there's no one way of approaching the blank page.
Right. And what's a typical day of writing for you? Do you write at night, in the day, or whenever the mood strikes?
I don't have a typical day, right? Because my work life sometimes involves writing. So I may be writing during the day, but it's not necessarily like my own creative writing. So I do find it wherever I can. So whether it's in the morning or midday, like today I was revising poems at lunchtime, or late at night. So, but if I have my choice, I would say late at night, listening to music is my favorite time to write.
And you deal with writer's block how? Do you get writer's block? Do you need
You
any
know,
kind of inspiration when you get it?
I've been thinking about the whole idea of writer's block, or being like, I often refer to it as being stuck, right? Like if you get stuck somewhere. And so the things that I usually turn to when I get stuck is some sort of movement. So whether it's go outside, so nature, movement. So it could be a walk, a run, a hike outside, or if it's too cold, I hula hoop in my living room and I clean, like whether it's clutter cleanup or just dusting or vacuuming. It's like that, the act of like the physical motion for me, definitely it kind of maybe does a disconnect between what I'm doing and my brain. And then it's like, okay, then the words start to come. And I always do take my phone on a walk or run, because I'll often stop in the middle of it to just kind of jot down notes. And something else that I was just talking about recently is journaling. So even though that's a form of writing, it does help me get unstuck, because sometimes it will uncover, an obstacle or a fear that might be preventing me from getting to a certain point in a work project. And talking to writer friends. I think having a community of people who, you can have like supportive, wonderful family and friends, but it's your writer friends who have been there and done that and know what you're going through. So sometimes just having a really good, honest conversation will help too.
Right. You need people who understand what we're going through.
Yeah, exactly.
And hiking and walking, that seems to be a common thread among writers. Even as far back as I can remember, all the great writers have to go for walks. It just seems like either they draw from inspiration or decompress on the way, but it seems to unblock them when they're stuck.
Yeah, I think it's that connection to nature. And I remember hearing the story of Mary Oliver when she was alive, walking in Provincetown, like in the National Seashore um, National Park. And there's a path, and she would put paper and pencils like in little nooks and crannies and trees where she knew she could stop and write if she needed to. She'd like walk her dogs, like, and I just, that story always stayed with me about her. And she's another one of my favorite writers. And I forgot to mention her earlier.
So do you find anything difficult about writing? Anything specifically difficult that drives you crazy, maybe?
Huh. I think for me, it's the getting started, right? So I think sometimes that is a big obstacle for me. But then once I get into the rhythm of it or a routine of it, then I just go. And I do really love revising. I know some people don't, but that's to me like where you can really get, your hands dirty and really kind of make it something into, I don't know, like take it to another level. So for me, maybe saying, okay, I'm going to sit down here and write this essay that's been in my head for, months or whatever. It's that getting started part. And then once I can do that and I have something down on the page, I call it tinkering. Like I just love to tinker with things and move things around, whether it's prose or poetry.
How long before you start revising? Like for me, when I do a short story or something, I'll put it away for about a week or two and just get away from it for a while.
Yeah. I don't have a set one. Sometimes like I wrote a series of rough drafts last week, and on Friday I sat down and did a second take at two of them. And then today I sat down. So that's a pretty short period of time. On other things, sometimes months, sometimes years. The novel I was talking about, I wrote that first chapter in 2009, and I didn't go back to it until 2019. So yeah, so some short, some long.
So what is your definition of a successful writer?
I think it's just somebody who actually writes and gets the story down on the page, whether you share it with other people or not. Like I think I definitely grew up with this notion of you had to be published to be successful. And I don't necessarily believe that. If that's your goal, have at it. And, I'll support anyone who wants that goal. But I think if you just want to tell stories, if you just want to tell stories that you can tell younger family members, or you want to capture the story of, the love story of grandparents in your life, and you're doing it just for family or whatever, to me, that's successful. Like, so anyone who is brave enough to put that story down on the page, to me, is a success.
And has there ever been a time where you felt like giving up? Just giving up writing completely and saying, you know what, I'm walking away from this.
Yeah. I never thought I would say yes, but yeah, yeah, pretty recently too. It's just like, yes, I have. But then, something will come to me, or somebody will say something. And, in that moment, like if you're in a conversation and like everything starts to slow down, right? Like it's almost like you can see like that effect that they do in movies where you can see like the dust floating through the air. It's like I can see like, oh, that's going to become a poem, or oh, that needs to be somewhere. And so that usually pulls me back in and says, this is what you'll be doing the rest of your life.
And at what point did you finally consider yourself a writer, a professional writer?
I don't know if I ever consciously did. I mean, in my 20s, I worked in advertising. So I was like writing professional writing things. I did not, I was not published in a book until I was at 41. I think it was when my first book came out. And I had some things in journals. So I don't know. That's an interesting question, because I don't think I've ever stopped to think of like, oh, okay, I'm here. I've arrived. I've just, in some way, shape, or form, no matter what job I've had, I just feel like I've been telling stories since I was 10. So maybe when I was 10, I knew I was a writer. Yeah.
And do you find writing cathartic, writing itself, or journaling? I know you said you like to journal.
I do find journaling. I journal on an app. So I don't journal often with pen and paper. And what I like about that is it keeps track. So like every day I can go back and see. I started using this app in 2017. So I can go back and see what I wrote on previous days. And that's kind of can be eye-opening to me, that on some things that I'm journaling about over and over again, for multiple years in a row. But I do find it cathartic. And a lot of real life things find themselves into my poetry. So I'm telling stories, I'm, honoring people, but I definitely, I write to remember, and then I write to forget too, like just to kind of get it into some, story form so I can move on from it.
Do you have any writing quirks, like writing in cafes? Do you need some kind of an object next to you when you're writing?
I fluctuate on that. I love listening to music, so that's like a big thing. With the pandemic, I can't say that I've been out anywhere writing, except in my office space. I do have a particular pen that I like to use when I am writing with pen and paper, and I've really just come in the last couple of years. I use Moleskine journals, and I won't use anything else, and I use unlined. I don't really like lined paper.
What is your advice to aspiring writers or poets?
Sure. So when I'm teaching workshops, I say this whether they're 5 years old, or I'm teaching a workshop right now that there's a 99-year-old man in, and talk about being able to learn, from other people's stories. It's been an amazing experience. So what I basically say is read, write, revise, and then repeat. And if you just keep going on that cycle, you will get your stories, your poems, your essays, your novel, your play, your screenplay down on the page.
Would you ever try to talk anybody out of becoming a writer? Would you ever say, you know what, it's just such a difficult road, why do it?
No, because I believe everyone has a story to tell. And when people are like, oh, poetry, I can't write, yes, you can write a poem. I can show you how. And here's like a really small way that you can start. You can start with a 3-line poem. And so no, I would never discourage anyone about writing.
So what aspect of your career is the most important to you? Is it being a writer? Is it being one of the other jobs that you have? What do you most consider yourself?
Right now in my life, they're so stitched together that I don't see them separate. Like I don't see my life as a writer and my life as a teacher separately. They're just, because those are the two primary parts of my work world. So I just see them as like this melded force, right? I have this love and passion for writing. I have this experience of it. And I've always wanted to be a teacher. Like I was one of those kids. Like I remember being in 2nd grade, my friend and I like lining up our stuffed animals, right? And like teaching to them. Like it was something that I always wanted to do. And I wasn't a classroom teacher until I was 40, and then only for a very short period of time. So the fact that I get to teach workshops and I get to focus on poetry, like to me, like every morning I get up and I'm like, this is a pretty cool gig. I'm a lucky one.
And if you could have dinner alone with any writer, living or dead, whom would you choose and what would you talk about?
I really wish I knew this question before, because I always hear people talk about this question and then like my mind just starts to race, right? I think contemporary, I would say Sharon Olds. I met her once at a reading. There's something about her energy, how she writes about hard things, how she writes about the everyday in the way she does it. Like I just want to hear more about her process, right? Like more about how she kind of just takes that and elevates it into poetry. And I think if it was somebody dead, it would probably have to be Emily Dickinson. And I would just want her to just kind of go through her quote, tell the truth, but tell all the truth, but tell it slant, is I use that at the beginning of my one book. I would just want to talk about that quote with her.
So with Emily Dickinson, I had also another professor who did not like her at all, could not stand, called her the mad dash woman because she used the dashes so much. Did that bother you, or as a teacher?
No, I love dashes. I use dashes all the time. So yeah, dashes are my jam. So I don't have a problem with that. But it's so interesting because you and I both have mentioned teachers like as influencers, right? Like, and I have a couple others, but my senior year teacher, he was a part-time teacher. He only came in to teach this creative writing, and he was an undertaker by trade and by family business. And he was just a riot. Like he recently passed away a couple of years ago, but he submitted one of my short stories and it won an honorable mention. So like those teachers that we have, like, I hope they know what impact they had on us even after we left their classrooms.
Right. And that reminds me of Willa Cather, my favorite writer. She
Yeah.
also, I think she wanted to be a doctor back when it wasn't really popular for women to be a doctor. But one of her teachers also submitted something and it got published, and that was it. It was, she just found writing hypnotic after that.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that.
Do you have any, I know I didn't warn you ahead of time, do you have any poems on hand that you would like to read?
You didn't, but I
That's
do.
okay if you don't, but if you do.
Yeah, I do, because I wasn't sure if you were going to ask that. So that's the one thing I'm like, maybe I should grab something just in case.
You know
So
me.
I know. So how many poems? Like just one?
Whatever you want. If they're long, one. If they're short, couple.
Okay. So I think I'm going to read two, if that's
Okay,
okay.
that's fine.
And one is from my most recent book called A Person Worth Knowing. And now I'm not going to find it. Here it is. And it's a found poem. So, you know, I talk about music. I write about music a lot often, and I also listen to music all the time. So this is a poem about a person who it was a very kind gesture during a really difficult time. And so I wrote this in honor of that. And so there's a lot of parts of song titles or whole song titles in here from bands like U2 and Echo and the Bunnymen and Peter Gabriel and a lot more people, Michael Jackson, a lot more people. It's called Gypsy Radio. The DJ's voice was made for the midnight shift, free-flowing water with an occasional white rapid. He's just old enough to remember how to spin vinyl, how building a playlist is an art form, how the hiss of the needle can heal almost any wound. Nights undulate at his matchmaking. 70s funk hustles with 80s pop, which moonwalks into crowd surfing with 90s grunge. They make beautiful children. There's no room for ordinary love, but in your eyes, November rain drenches him. He lets the flood disco. You're already gone, running and running into the mystic, where you'll wait for the boys of summer to take you to the church of your childhood, your very own home by the sea. Stay with the DJ until the end, and he'll prove you get what you give to the spinning. It's the denouement of night now, and as the sky somersaults, you're alone in these dreams, where he's nicknamed you Miss K, with lips like sugar and hips like an unforgettable fire.
Very nice.
Thank you. And then this one is in a newer poem that's still kind of in the revision stages, but it was published in an online literary journal called Redheaded Stepchild, which only accepts poems that are rejected elsewhere. And I just loved that concept of the journal. So I thought I would submit something. And it was in their, I think their summer 2021 issue. I woke up at 3 a.m. thinking I was somewhere else. The air hasn't taken the turn toward fall quite yet. I want to be a tree blowing in wind. I want to be the last leaf to fall, bright orange. No, I want to be crimson. Clouds are moving against the jet stream. A white-gray sky carries hidden stories. Maybe if I had a daughter, I would know the secrets of this land. Mom of grown sons, I often stand on the sidelines. How often can a heart skip a beat and still go on? Sometimes I can hear the ocean in the mountain wind. Maybe the air has turned. Maybe I can no longer feel variations. Remember Etch-a-Sketches? A quick shake would erase a life. I miss cardboard playhouses, Zoom, the TV show, and electric company. My mom's fried chicken, the greasy paper bags she used to bread it. I can see the leaves are dimming before their turn. The water tower is dismantled. I pray the church steeple doesn't topple.
Wow, that is powerful. I knew the first time I ever heard you read a poem that you were multi-talented.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
When we did the I Am Strength tour, which
I
was,
know.
wasn't it wonderful to be with
That
all
was-
those women writers, so powerful.
Yes, that's what I love about anthologies too, right? When you can come together and when we could do in person regularly readings and being able to do that I Am Strength, that was such fun. I loved it.
I did too. When I first had to go out and do my own book, I didn't know what to do. You know, I was so nervous. I'm like, I miss the ladies and being with everybody. And
Right.
so, well, Dawn, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for doing this. I look forward to seeing some of your other interviews as well.
Oh, great. So thank you again. I really enjoyed this in-depth conversation, and good luck with your future endeavors.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
So that concludes another episode, the second episode of Tea with Tara, Conversations About Writing. And as always, Dawn Leas is an amazing poet. And I want to thank all of you for joining me and Dawn, and I hope you have a great day. And remember, if you have this inexplicable reason that you need to run to the pen, then you might be a writer. See you next time.